So welcome everyone to the third session with BAR, the BAR Centre. We're going to follow on with student-to-student relationships. I'm quite interested in this because it's often, schools can be very rough places for some children. And we do a lot with special needs in teaching times and children that might not have physical or emotional difficulties, but they seem vulnerable to the larger group. We're very keen to see how you manage those relationships. And I'm also keen to see how you assess what an authentic relationship is and what isn't an authentic relationship. We touched on this yesterday. And I'm also, and I think I've heard from feedback that we're very keen to understand what is the content of the training that you give to your coaches that works in schools. So there's lots of questions flying around, and I hope we'll be able to address some of these in the session. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Angela, and let's go.
Fantastic. Well, I'm appreciative of everyone being here, and I actually like the way we started by just kind of keeping the conversation going and making sure that we're addressing your needs. So it's actually really helpful. We did make a couple adaptations yesterday, kind of based on some of the feedback from yesterday. So we do have some more information about coaching and some of those delineators. But Janice, I'm going to give you logistics again before we get into the heart of it.
Yeah, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. I just want to do a quick round of introductions. You're going to see some familiar faces here. So I'm going to play host again, Janice Eldridge, Director of BAR Schools. We have Angie with us today, Executive Director. Anush Arma is our Senior Research Scientist. Beth Heimer is our Associate Director of Elementary Schools. And Christina Ritter is our Associate Director of Strategic Initiatives. And we have back with us Angie Ryder, the Assistant Principal at South St. Paul High School in Minnesota. So we're excited to talk to you today about those student-to-student relationships and family engagement. And with that, I will pass it back to Angie.
Mm-hmm. So I think kind of one of the key pieces that we were going to kind of talk about, and you alluded to it, Howard, is the recognition that schools are more than just educational spaces, and that this really is, how young people grow and how they kind of connect with others, learn those necessary skills, and how do we foster an environment that both the adults are doing that, but the other students are doing that with their peers. So we really need to be kind of attentive to that student-to-student relationship, so the students feel connected and safe and are able to really learn and thrive. I know yesterday I had, kind of begun the story with how BAR was originated. I think in terms of carrying that story forward a bit, just because we're going to be talking about the coaches. When we first started off in terms of coaches, I had colleagues of the first school that I worked with coaching other schools. So this was very much a very warm baton toss, where I was like, you are a teacher I've worked with for 10 years. Can you please go coach this school in California? Because I know you know the model, I know you know me, and they're going to be able to coach it. As we've continued to grow, and now we're at 180 schools, there are many coaches I've never, met. And what we have right now is really tight training models and tight both to coach as well as to assess the schools as well as the coaches themselves. And I think once again, what you're going to hear is the delineation of, we have incredibly talented people, but they aren't just having to be talented people. They're coaching to a model that's had 22 years of research. So we know that when we see, because we have a live update every week of where 180 schools are at, we know when a school is moving from, green to yellow or yellow to red, that we need to intervene as a team. So that coach is no longer alone doing that work. So we are brought in kind of other resources to make sure that those supports are growing. So we are making sure that all those students are connected. So we'll be learning kind of more about that, but it's very systemic, not just the school approach, but our approach with the schools. So we're no longer dependent on superstar teachers, which is great to have, but it's not enough to actually transform our school systems. So
Absolutely.
actually, Anu, I think you're up next.
I heard a question though, Angie.
Yeah.
I'm so
Go ahead,
sorry.
Janet.
Did someone have a question?
No, then we're good. Janice, do you want to talk about the professional development?
Yeah, absolutely. So we wanted to touch on both the professional development and the coaching a little bit to give you a more of a clear picture of what that looks like. I will echo Angie's caution that, you know, this is, as I said yesterday, this is a 3-year model, and it's a very intensive coaching experience. I have both been coached by BAR and been a BAR coach to almost 40 schools around the country, and now oversee the coaches. And so while I would love to, you know, say, here's a quick fix, here's some things you can do, it's an intensive years long model of coaching. Because changing mindsets is not overnight work. It's long, continuous work. And that starts with our professional development over the summer. All of our professional development is personalized to the school. So in normal times, we go to the school to deliver that. And we do a needs analysis with the school before coming out to the school to really know how we can cater to them. So we always send 2 trainers out. Most of the people, so one of the trainers that will go is their coach, so to start building that relationship with them. And all of our trainers and coaches have experienced BAR or education in some way, right? So when you walk into the training to do it, you know, we get the typical like, oh, I have these other outside people coming to train me. And when I say, you know, hey, I taught for 20 years, I worked in a BAR school, immediately that tension slides away, right? Because they know that I've done the work that I'm asking them to do. And so when you talk about barriers with really tricky staff, that immediately starts to take the barrier down. We also have a lot of conversations during those first 2 days of training. So the first 2 days are the implementation training. When I'm training, I love to look for those staff that are sitting in the corner with their arms crossed. Those are the staff that I have lunch with. Those are the staff that I have the most conversations with, and say, hey, I love a challenge. What do I have my work cut out for me with? And those first 2 days are really about how can we implement BAR at your school. And usually by the end of those first 2 days, we have most of the staff bought in, because it's not just a training on here's another thing you're going to do. It's about how we're going to change the systems of your school. And we spend a lot of time during those first 2 days team building. And so we really remind them of why they came to this field and why they love working together. And so they leave on this high after the first 2 days and are ready and re-engaged to do this work. We come back every summer and do 2 days for those first 3 years. So we have an equity training, a substance abuse training, an effective team meetings training, and a trauma training, all through the lens of BAR and how you can address those issues at your school through BAR. So that's the beginning with the professional development. Ari, if you want to go to the next slide, this was just a screenshot from one of our Zoom trainings this summer. And then the coaching is unlimited coaching. And I think it's sometimes easier to tell you from my perspective when I was receiving the coaching. I was working in a school. My principal came to me one day while I was teaching a class and said, can I speak to you in the hallway? Which is never a good sign. And I was like, sure. And he said, hey, we just got this new grant. I need you to run this thing. And I was like, well, what is it? And he was like, it's right up your alley. You're going to love it. And I was like, okay. And then they said, you're going to have this coach. And I said, a coach? What does that even mean? And so I met the person who was going to be my coach, Justin, and he said, you can call me anytime. And I was like, what? And he said, really, anytime you need me. As you're implementing this model, if you need to talk every day, I want you to call me every day. And I was like, he doesn't really mean it. What I realized is he did mean it. And for a while, I did call him almost every day, because systems change in school is not easy. And so I would go to those block meetings that we talked about yesterday, and my teachers would be like, this is too much work. I don't want to change education. My failure rate's high. I like it high. I like to fail kids. That shows I'm rigorous. And so every day I was calling and having these conversations with Justin and saying, what do I do? I've never done this before. How do I do this? And he was coaching me through all of these scenarios day after day. And as I started to trust him, I started to share more and more with him. And he really started to understand the specific context of my school and be able to coach me through it. And so Justin was really our first bar coach after Angie, of course. And he then trained me, and now I have trained the other coaches. And we have a very tight coaching model, all built to the fidelity. So the coaching all goes back to, are you doing those block meetings? Are you running your data? Are you building relationships? And we have very specific things that we're coaching to. So coaches are not just left to, do for themselves what they think is right. They're coaching to the evidence of the model. So we have very specific prompts that they're coaching to on a weekly basis. And then as Angie referenced, we have very tight systems for reporting out on the schools so that we know the state of each school every week. So again, the same systems we're asking our schools to do, we are using for ourselves. And so the coaching model, I think for me as a person receiving it, that unlimited coaching was the most important thing, because I had never in education had someone say to me, I'll help you anytime you need it. No one says that in a school. And it's hard to implement a new system, and it's hard to transform thinking. And so for me to have a thought partner that was outside my school was really important. And I didn't even realize all the ways he was guiding me until later when I became a coach. And so, glad to stop here and take some specific questions about coaching, but that is what I would give as a broad overview.
Can I ask if you could give some scenarios of when you approached a coach and you said, I've got difficult staff here, they don't want to join the ride. How did the coach respond? What would be the sort of thing he would respond with, or he, she, or whoever it was?
And could I piggyback on that as well, just to say, when you said, Janice, this is very helpful actually, giving a good picture of coaching, but when you said, and you were coached through it, that phrase is the whole of what they were doing. What's in that phrase, and I was coached through it? What did the coach do with you? What does coaching involve?
Yeah.
Was he, for instance, how did the interaction go? Did he ask you to describe in detail the issue? Did he ask you how what have you done so far? And then did he sort of, typically coaching is not usually about telling you how to do it, but really getting under the skin of your situation and in a sort of granular way, trying to work your way through it. So what's that like, if you could describe that?
Janice, do you mind if I put a context on first and I'll have you give an example? I think one of the pieces that's important with the BAR model, similar to our belief about students, we do believe every staff is both capable of this work as well as well-intended. Kind of very early on, I had met with a superintendent who had said he didn't believe that a teacher could hold on to their identity if they could not categorize a student who wasn't doing well in their class as either not capable or not trying. So if I'm a good teacher, and that's what my role is, if you're not learning, that means that either you're not trying or you're not capable. The BAR model itself disrupts that, because you are now seeing multiple people that are seeing things, including a mental health specialist. And one of the things that this model requires is you begin every conversation with what is going right about the student? What is the strength about the student? So if you are centered on this conversation, you're then having to reconcile your capability as a teacher, even though Beth is doing fine in Howard's class and I'm she's failing in my class. So now it's like, okay, so what's potentially happening with me, which changes the onus of responsibility. So many of these superintendents and leaders say, we have had professional development available forever, but we couldn't get teachers to access it because they never took the issue to be themselves. But when you are, once again, working on staff to staff and you have these peer groups and you're able to have transparency in data, and I'm able to see that, you know, Beth is coming to Anu's class and she's not coming to mine, which subsequently means Beth is capable of coming to class and there's something going on here. So I think if we even took one step back, that is a big part of our training, that you have to have this belief system about the adults, just like you do the students. So then if we believe when you're coaching the school that we have to go forward. Janice, I think of your teacher once again, who was very pride-filled and had, you can share this one, but had very pride-filled, failed half of her students for years because of high standards. And I know that that was something that Justin worked with you on, and then she ended up on the local news. But if you want to share that one, that was an interesting dilemma.
Sure. Actually, I was just thinking of the same thing. Yeah, this is as specific as an example as I can think of. I would just caution, it's a little bit like asking to share like the story of a romance with someone like in 5 minutes, because like these are very extended relationships and very extended working. And so I just want to make sure that's really clear that like this was a number of years of work, and I just don't think that can be underestimated, but I'm happy to provide as specific an example as I can to help illustrate the point. So yes, I had a teacher. So my first year as bar coordinator, I had already worked with these teachers for over 10 years. So they were colleagues, dear friends, and I was asked to be in this position, wasn't sure what it was. And one of the first things Justin asked me to do was start running the failure rate, which at my school, no teacher had ever spoken to another teacher about their failure rate or looked at their grades. It was not culturally acceptable. So I ran the failure rates for the first time, and I realized that this specific science teacher had a failure rate of over 50%, and over 50% of her kids were failing. And so Justin said, you know, I think you should have a private conversation with her. We don't want to embarrass her. We don't want to call her out, but just go talk to her and ask her what she thinks of that. And so I did. I went and spoke with her privately, and I had the data, and he really helped me see, like, it's just about the data. It's not, let's not make it personal. Let's just look at the data and have a conversation about the data. So I had the data, and I went and had my first conversation with her, and she said, that makes me a really good teacher. That means I'm really rigorous. 50% of kids cannot meet my rigor because I'm so rigorous. And I was like, okay. And so I left because I didn't know what else to say. And so I went back and called Justin, and I said, she thinks she's a great teacher. She thinks this failure rate is good. What do I do? And so he helped me go through this process of, well, do I think that's good? Do we think that's good? So what would be the next step with her? And so I went back and had another conversation with her. And so what's good about that? What's good about 50% of kids failing your class? All the while knowing that this is a good friend of mine, that a relationship's on the line, right? And so this was not overnight. This was over a series of months. There were tears involved on her end, not mine, where she came to this realization that failing 50% of her kids was a failure on her part, not on the student's part. And that's not what it meant to be rigorous. By the end of the year, her failure rate was 6%, and she was so proud of it. When Barr was asked to do an interview with the local news, she said she wanted to be the one to do the interview to talk about what it means to be rigorous in a classroom. And that means that the students are supported and passing your classes. She didn't change her rigor at all. She changed the way that she was supporting students to get to her rigor. And that's where we had to get to. And that's what Justin helped me get to be able to do. I didn't know how to do that on my own. I had never done that. I would have never done that without Barr. I would have never dared to say to another teacher, why do you have a 50% failure rate? I wouldn't have even known she had a 50% failure rate. And that's the conversation that coaches have, and that's the work that they do. Is that helpful?
Janice, I think that's a great illustration. If we can, let's keep going, because I feel like this could be another big piece, but I'm hopeful that that once again gives the illustration. I think the other piece that really illustrates, hopefully to people from UK, is we are setting up the school to be successful on their own. So that goal is to work with the school for 3 years and provide the school with the knowledge to both identify issues and have these conversations and set the culture. So our coaches work really closely with the school for 3 years, and then it's a much lighter touch. But our goal is to, once again, have Janice's of the world, which we now have, and Angie Ryder's a coordinator at her school. So she's been getting the coaching, and every coach comes in at a different place. Like Angie's already an administrator. Some are teachers, some haven't done this, some have. But when you're moving to the model, how do we equip the school to move this forward? Anu, will you take us back to some data?
I will, and I will just go through the research findings as a reminder and then focus on hearing from students, because today is all about student voice. So just as a reminder, this is our research at a glance. We had 12 within school randomized controlled trials in these 4 states that are visible on the slide, 4,700 plus students, almost 150 teachers, 149. And again, over 70% of these students were students of color or eligible for free and reduced lunch, our proxy for students in poverty. And they were randomly assigned to BAR, or business as usual, and the outcome measures that we looked at: credits earned, passing courses, NWA scores, which is our achievement test score, one of them used in the States, student perception, and teacher perception. The next slide, just as a reminder, shows our data from our first randomized controlled trial in Hemet High School, a suburban Los Angeles school. And this was funded through federal monies. Failure rates, which we've talked about extensively, and I can attest to this teacher that Janice just talked about. I visited her classroom, and it was a journey. It was a journey. I visited that school over the course of the year as the evaluator, and it was a journey. So all of these failure rates represent a journey. I do want to say that. But they do go down over time for all students and Hispanic students, as they did in our first randomized control trial. And achievement test scores, which are the scores on the right, do go up for BAR and for BAR students as compared to control students. The next slide shows our validation study. And these are the results from randomized control trials in 11 other schools, again, supported by federal funds. Failure rates for BAR students in dark blue are always lower than non-BAR students, and that's the case for boys, girls, minority, and white students. The next slide, just as a reminder of our theory of change, this is so important to stay grounded in this. And we've already talked about this. Maybe our next version of this will have coaching as the predecessor to changing teacher attitudes. We work with teachers to change their attitudes, then their behaviors, student attitudes, student behaviors, and academic outcomes. But today I want to bring in the student voice to actually hear those who experience the model outcome. So our external evaluators, the American Institutes of Research, AIR, they conducted an online student survey at the end of the RCT year, and that was given to BAR and control students. 2,700 plus students participated in the survey. And these survey items were derived from several validated protocols, and many were created specifically for this particular evaluation. And these are the definitions of the constructs that we used. The first 3 constructs: supportive relationships. Do students feel that their teachers are supportive of their interests and invested? Are they invested in their emotional well-being? Expectations and rigor. The students believe that teachers have high expectations for their performance. They have guidelines and they encourage them to be successful. Engagement. They prepare for and participate in class activities, ask questions, and evidence interest in the lesson. The next slide shows the next 3 constructs. Do they have a sense of belonging? Do they feel respected, accepted, and understood by their peers? Do they feel that they belong? Social emotional learning. Do they believe that they and their classmates can work through disagreements, manage emotions, and act responsibly? And then finally, one that many of you may have heard of, grit. Can they focus on and work toward their goals even when setbacks occur? Next slide shows the outcomes that we received on these 6 scales. And you'll see that the first 3 scales, everything, all the impacts favored BAR. But the first 3 showed statistically significant differences between the bar and control students. So we achieved those on supportive relationships, expectations and rigor, and student engagement. So, oh, I should also mention that AIR disaggregated the sample into 6 student subgroups. Those were the same as before: boys, girls, students of color, white students, and those eligible for free and reduced lunch. Again, our proxy for poverty. And the only subgroup for whom we did not find statistically significant differences between bar and control were white students. But all the other subgroups were statistically significantly different when we looked at bar and non-bar. So let's hear what they said in their own voices, just to give a few illustrations. So regarding supportive relationships, I personally had a great experience with bar. I've never felt so close to teachers as I do with my bar teachers. I also feel like I understand a lot of people in my grade better than before. So that's student to student, one student in Minnesota. The next one talks about expectations and rigor. This year it was amazing. Even though some of the classes were hard, I still made out good, and now I have a good grade. You should never give up in your work and always stay positive, because what you want in the future will come true only if you work hard enough and never give up. You should always have a connection with your classmates and your teachers, because those people would be the ones that would help you a lot in school. A California student. And the last scale on which we achieved statistical significance between bar and control, student engagement. I liked my English teacher because she always tried to give choices. We could do presentations, skits, the projects were fun and engaging. She also gave us the choice of a test for those who didn't want to do the project or couldn't, and would let students come into her classroom before and after school, as well as during lunch, to talk to her if they didn't understand the subject. Now, I can't speak to every teacher, but this is an example of a teacher bending, stretching, offering options where she or he may not have done so before. May have thought, this is my option, you either meet it or you don't. But now students are perceiving that if I can't do it this way, maybe this teacher will give some evidence and flexibility. And that's what I think this quote illustrates. So again, back to our mediation analysis, I'll just remind everyone that we see student attitudes and behaviors improve as a result of the bar model strategies, which we always begin by affecting teachers. And then we see student achievement increasing as well. I will turn it back over to my coworkers. Thank you.
Thank you, Anu. We'll pause for a second for any questions.
Can I ask the obvious one? What was the problem with the white students then?
Well, again, the impact would have shown that white students were slightly different than, the white students in bar did better than the non-bar students. They just didn't achieve statistical significance. So let's speculate. Angie, do you have a comment on that?
Is that Angie Wright or Angie Jerebeck?
I'm sorry. Well, Angie Jerebeck, but
Angie Ryder, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, if you have a thought, let's speculate.
I think that there's not a statistical a difference because our white students are already advantaged by the system. So we've built a system that works for more of our white kids than our non-white kids. And so I personally think that's probably the biggest issue, is that by changing our model and our mindset, we are helping those kids who have kind of been behind the 8 ball and haven't gotten the best of the system.
Brilliant, Angie.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Howard, I think what that speaks to, once again, is I think our strong belief that when we even talk about gaps, that we really talk about this opportunity gap, because we really do believe the system is misaligned versus the students not being able to achieve. But we really are putting into the responsibility, as well as our intervention, is how do we systemically change versus not necessarily, just focusing on a group of students or a group of teachers. How do we change the system so we can really realize this potential? But yes, Janice, I think kind of keep us moving.
Yeah, thank you. So again, just focusing on relationships and data as our 2 pillars. And today, Ari, if you want to go ahead to the next slide. Today, we're going to look at that student to student. So just a reminder of where we've been. We've been on staff to staff. We've talked about staff to student. And today we're really going to focus on that student to student and how you can build that culture between students. And we have Angie Ryder here today with us to talk about how that happens at the school level. So I'm going to pass that over to Angie.
Thanks, Janice. So what I did was reached out to my bar team teachers and asked them what they've noticed. This is our 4th year with bar. We started with one team of 3 teachers and half the 9th graders. And we now have all the 9th graders in the team, and we were expanding the program up all the way through 12th grade to some level. And the overall feeling that the teachers gave was that in general, the kids are kinder to each other and they take care of each other. There's a bigger sense of community than we had prior to having this model. And we're a grade 6-12 building. So our kids have been together, most of them, for at least 4 years before they get to 9th grade. Many of them, because we're a small district, have been together since kindergarten. And sometimes their relationships with one another aren't particularly healthy. And so what we've noticed is that they're taking better care of each other. My social studies teacher said that what he's noticed specifically is that immediately following eye times, so a class will do an eye time about every 3 weeks. Each subject area has a part of the rotation. So about every 3 weeks, his class would be up for eye time. And he noticed that in the days right after eye times, the kids were looking to each other for help more than directly from him. And the kids were actually noticing that the kid next to them might need some help. So their peer was struggling, and they would actually take the initiative to reach over and help. Like we're on this page talking about the content, and just it felt like more of a family than it did on the days that, that they didn't have the eye times. And he said that as the year progressed, they were helping each other all the time. It wasn't just that immediately following the eye times where they had taken time away from social studies to focus on community, that community started to grow. And the final thing that was brought up was one of my other English teachers it's been really difficult this year not having, all our kids with us all the time. And so the kids weren't interacting, which is something we value, is the kids working together because we're not animals that live in isolation. And she was having a really hard time getting the kids to interact with one another. They did the getting acquainted eye time virtually and used Flipgrid to record their bits and shared that with each other. And then she's finding now that the kids are actually working together in a way that they hadn't up until this point. I mean, because the world shut down in March, so we hadn't seen so many of our kids for 6 months. And to get them back into the groove of being with people, it took this opportunity for them to talk about themselves and share that virtually with their classmates to really start to kind of unwind those months and months of isolation. And so just the overall feel is gentler and kinder and more community-based, and it's been a positive thing for us. At that point, unless there's questions, I'm going to turn it over to Beth.
Thanks, Angie. That's great.
Okay, I'm just going to touch a little bit more on the elementary aspect with the relationship building, as well as touch on the support of families as well. We talked a little bit about U-Times yesterday and how it is beneficial for a teacher to be able to learn about her students, but they're also very beneficial for students to be able to learn about each other. So often in the classroom, teachers might partner students up to work on a math assignment or a reading assignment, and typically then you have, sometimes partnered up, a student who is struggling with a student who is excelling, and creating those different dynamics. And with the U-Times, considering that they are relationship strength based, there's no longer that piece of somebody is helping the other one, but this is a chance for students just to really get to know each other. It's a chance for a student to figure out that where they might not feel that they have similarities or things in common with other students in the class, they're able to find different connections that they wouldn't be able to find during a different activity or during an academic concept. And I would touch on with the families groups, the FAR Center at the elementary level, we really like to partner with whatever pre-existing parent organization is already in place. And I would share an interesting story that we just had happen yesterday, in that we were having a discussion with a principal at one of the schools that is implementing this year. And he had shared that they just had their PTO meeting, and he and their instructional coach had prepared a presentation in that the school had actually created an equity organization, an equity group, out of some polls that were taken that parents were wanting. So he said, we presented that we've created this equity group in response to what you'd asked for. And then at the end of the meeting, he said, we happened to mention that we were doing BAR this year, and that it was a program that was strength-based, and the intent was that every student in the school would be discussed by staff. And he said at the end of the meeting, all the parents wanted to talk about was the BAR program, and how interested and how fascinated and excited they were. And Christina's nodding her head because she was on this call with me, that the idea that each one of their students was going to be talked about in a strength-based positive approach by the staff at that school. So while they had prepared this great presentation introducing this program that they created, and the BAR program was just going to be we're communicating this to you, that is what the parents were excited about for the year at that school. So I think, having the parents know the intentionality behind the BAR model and the effect that it's going to have on each one of their students, whether their student is thriving or their student is struggling, or maybe their student is just that student that just kind of goes along with the course and doesn't cause too much of a stir, that each one of those children will be given the same attention to over the course of the year. Any questions?
Thank you, Beth. And I'm going to hand it over to Christina to close us out with an I-Time.
Thanks, Janice. So for us to be able to really understand an I-Time, I think it's important for us to actually participate in one. So I am asking that you actively participate in today's lesson. And thank you for spending the last 3 days with us. Yesterday, my colleague Tony walked us through an I-Time lesson called Rainbow in the Clouds. And this has been mentioned, but I'd like to reiterate that there are 3 volumes of I-Times with about 100 lessons. And these lessons are facilitated by the teacher during a regular class period. And I think that's valuable because many times our teachers are thinking, I don't have enough time to teach the content, but we all know that our students will better learn if they feel safe and supported in the environment in which they are learning. So these lessons help create that environment. So these lessons are facilitated each week by a member of the team. So students are receiving these lessons weekly, and they're designed to build social emotional skills and facilitate relationship building between the staff and the student, and most importantly, from student to student. Through these lessons, students are able to connect with students they may not readily engage with, while also immediately practicing a new SEL skill. And I think that's another important facet of this, that it's one thing to talk about a skill, it's one thing to talk about grit or resiliency, it's another thing to begin to immediately put that into practice. And we know what we don't practice immediately, we will not use. So teachers participate in the lesson with the students and appropriately model the desired skills. And today I really would like for you to participate in this I-Time session 21 called What's on Your Plate from Volume 1. So in order to participate, you will need a piece of paper. And so I'd like all of my colleagues who have done this as well to grab a piece of paper, and on your paper, draw a circle about the size of a dinner plate. Your dinner plate and the size of your dinner plate, completely up to you. If it looks like a platter, that's fine. And then just like on your screen, I'd like you to divide it into 4 sections and label the sections as you see there. The top left, activities, interest beside it, bottom left, responsibilities, and the bottom right, miscellaneous. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that, or a second. In a few minutes, in each corresponding section of the plate, you will write down what's going on in your life right now. But before you start, I'd like to show you an example of what's on my plate. So Ari, if you'll go to the next slide. So you see it's pretty busy, but I'd like to show you an example of a plate I completed. Much like in the classroom, the teacher will model and present experiences or what needs to be shared with the student in regard to the lesson. And you see my plate is pretty busy. In the activity sections, just a few things I'd like to highlight are I'm really getting acquainted again with my Kindle and reading books on my Kindle, but also competing with that is my internal need to binge watch and watch Netflix. But I'm also trying to force myself to go outside and do some biking. Inside, I'm cooking as I'm not going to too many restaurants. In the right corner under interest, I am really interested in policy. I know which may sound bizarre. I like painting, super interested in screenwriting. I do a lot of journaling, photography, also just any activity where I can grow my learning. In the miscellaneous part, I'm feeling just the word pressure really came to mind. Lots of pressure from many different places. Not able to pinpoint it, but just feeling this overwhelming pressure, and it may be COVID related. Politics are a hot topic right now. Also, I put Twitter, as I use Twitter as a form of socializing. Also have a clock there as I struggle with organizing my time. I feel like it's a piece of my plate. And then in the last, you see, I have tons of responsibilities. My family, my dogs, my work, my learning and my brain, my extended family. How do I continue to socialize even though that it may appear different? My mental health, my physical health, and I listed all of those as responsibilities. Remember, this is my plate, and what I put on it is very specific to me. And as you do your plate, you're going to put information that is very specific to you and what's going on right now. So I'd like to just give you a few minutes just to understand and sample what it's like to be a participant in this. We're just going to stay silent for a few minutes, and I'd like for you to fill out what's on your plate. At least put 1 to 2 items in the corresponding sections. Let's take another minute just to make sure you have 1 to 2 in each section. All right, I know you may still be writing, and that's okay if you want to continue writing, but what I'd like to do, and just to be able to show you from a participant, from being a part of this, what this would look like from a student perspective. So I would then model a conversation about we would break the students up into partners and then ask them to engage in conversation. What is similar? What is different? What did you hear your partner say that you never knew about your partner? So what I'd like to do, and I'm going to put Janice on the spot because she is actually on my screen so I can see her, is I would just like to say, Janice, if she would model this with me, we're just going to show you what this would look like with students. So Janice, could you just share with me a few things that are on your plate, maybe one from each area, and just talk a little bit about them?
Sure. So for activities, the first thing I put was my Peloton, because I recently got a Peloton over the summer. And so I've been trying to work out every other day, which I've been pretty consistent with. I've at least hit 3 times a week, every week since I got it. So I'm very happy with myself for that. Came highly recommended to me from a dear friend. Interests, I love decorating my home, and we bought a new home about a year ago. And so you guys have seen my office transformation over the past 6 months, but you actually can't see all the fun stuff. I made my background very nice and plain, but all of my fun special stuff is actually in front of me. Like I have a map with push pins of everywhere I've traveled, and I have all of my special bar stuff like up on a shelf, all my pictures of all my colleagues and gifts people have given me. And so that's been really fun. For responsibilities, I put budgeting. I've been doing a lot with budgeting. So for the past 2 years, I've been really conscientious. I do something with our budget every single day. So I have an app that I log into every day and work on our family budget. And I didn't get to miscellaneous, but I could do Twitter with you because I see you and I are on Twitter together every day.
That's so great. I heard you say that the budget, and that really interests me, Janice, because I think that's something that I could grow on. So I would love to know more about your app, and and I love that you're also committed to it and doing it every day. I think that's why budgets work, right? What we pay attention to is, what we monitor gets done. So I'd just love to know more about that app. And every time you and I talk, we talk about the Peloton, and I'm just like, you have got me so convinced. Like that's the one next step. So I wouldn't do outside biking, I would do inside biking. So I think those are, maybe some of the interests I really didn't know we had, especially about the budgeting. So I'd love for us to talk more about that when we have some time.
I would love that.
So I'm gonna stop the role play for a second, but Janice didn't know that I was gonna engage in a conversation. And quite honestly, I talk with Janice every single day and learn something new about her in this activity. So oftentimes when we group students together, we can still group them by, they have may be best friends, or they may not know each other at all. But the point is to be able that the information on the plate is what sparks the conversation. And also from a teacher perspective, they get to hear about what the teacher is interested, and it may spark a conversation. If I put down music, or a music group that listening to music was my activity, then it may lead to a conversation between me and that student. The same for the student, as you witnessed with Janice and I, it really helps drive the conversation much deeper, and it doesn't remain at the superficial level, even if we don't know each other well, because now we have something that we are equally discussing because we have both participated in the activity. At this point, we would then bring the whole group back together, and the teacher would facilitate a whole group discussion on what the participants learned about themselves, their partners. The picture you're actually seeing in front of you is I witnessed this at a school, and the students were so engaged. It was in a biology class. You see, there's a high level, I think there was 30 something students, but they all wanted to share. Not one person, when the teacher said, talk to me about something you found out about your partner, every student wanted to talk about something they had learned about their partner. They didn't want to talk about themselves. They wanted to talk about their new friend, a new relationship that they had developed. So the other thing that we would do in closing out this activity, and I'm going to ask for you to do, is I'd like for you to reflect on a few questions that continue to drive this social emotional skill forward. So as you look at your plate, I'd like for you to circle or just think about this. What are the answers to these questions? So as you look at your plate, what do you enjoy the most? You can circle that or just put your eye towards it. What takes the most time? What would you like to spend more time doing? What drains most of your energy? What energizes you the most? What is on your plate that you could maybe do without? And the final question that I would like for you to be brave enough to put an answer in the chat box is, if you could make different choices about how you spend your time, what would you change? And I am typing my response to model what I would like to see from you guys. More time with family and friends. I'd make a point to be outside more energy for my family, be better at having a work-life balance, more time in creative endeavors, reading for pleasure, more time to self-care. So as those answers continue to come through, what I'd also like to point out is this lesson can be done in a virtual setting. So if I more reading of fiction, I am so with you. I would love to share titles if we could. But this sparks a conversation about trying to find that balance and about really looking at on your plate, more time with grandchildren, exactly. And about making sure that as I did this plate, I noticed that I had a heavy amount on responsibilities. There were lots of interests I had, but I wasn't attending to those. I wasn't really taking time. So how am I going to shift, or what needs to shift in order for that to occur? And that idea of self-regulatory behaviors doesn't become something in theory, but becomes something practical. What can I do? And how can I use this information in helping myself grow? The other important piece of this iTime lesson is that you see all of these students in this picture. What the teacher asked was, may I have your plate? Is it okay if I read your plate and I have your plate? Every single one of the students said yes. And what the teacher then did was she took that iTime activity and took what was on the student's plate, and they used it to have a very qualitative discussion within their block meeting on what's going well with these students. What are they involved in? What interests do they have? How many responsibilities do they have? Oh, I didn't know that Joey was responsible for caring for his younger brother and sister every afternoon. That helps me determine he can't come to tutoring, but when else can I offer this student tutoring? So they're able to assess, based on student-led information, what are the potential barriers? What are the students' strengths that they're bringing to the table? And they use this information. And I know there was a question about authentic relationships. And I think authenticity comes from, is it student-driven? What information is the student willing to share? Do they feel safe enough to engage in this type of sharing with the teacher? And in these cases, as Janice and Anu and everyone has attested to, these occur over time. So these lessons are stackable skills that you start with session 1, you end with session 40, whatever the case may be. But all along, you're building these skills within the core content time and establishing this repertoire with your kids. The other thing I'd like to point out about this particular lesson when I watched it was that every teacher on the team went ahead and did a plate. Even though they weren't leading this lesson, they engaged in the lesson. So when the teacher presented, the teacher was able to hold up her plate, and then the 3 other people on the team and said, let me show you Ms. Simonet's plate. Let me show you, Mr. Castro's plate. And the students understood that this lesson was important because everybody was participating in it and building that community. So I think, this is just one of many examples of how to build authentic relationships and how that qualitative data can then be used to leverage. How do we intervene, and what does that intervention look like? And how do we circle back to make sure that that intervention is actually working and impacting the students in a positive way? So I thank you for participating with me today. And if you have any questions about the lesson, I'd be happy to address them.
Thanks so much. Really interesting.
Appreciate that, Howard. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague.
Yes, and with that, we have neared the end of our presentation, so we're happy to take any final questions. And if there's no final questions, we'll turn it back to you, Howard.
Is there a sort of manual for working with these students? You know, that was one great idea, but is there a resource book that coaches can use and you know, schools going through BAR can work on?
Janice, if you don't mind, I'll take that because it reminded me of something I neglected to say. So the questions, for instance, that I used, one is just teacher-led, because we, as Angie said, we believe in the power of the teacher. So the teacher has to read the room and be able to respond accordingly. But also the teacher is not void of having a set of questions that they can use to prompt that conversation. So the questions I asked about, you know, especially the one towards the end or any of the others, you know, what is on your plate that brings you joy? Those are part of the lesson. So the teacher has a way to facilitate and engage this very conversation-driven lesson where they're facilitating and not instructing. And so, yes, the lessons come in a way that equips the teacher to be able to lead these with their student.
So Howard, there's 90 lessons that we have right now. And a lot of the training is actually how teachers can facilitate the lesson, as we kind of implied before, and not necessarily teach the lesson. So even this example of what's on your plate, it's a way to humanize the adult and broker a relationship, but not overshare. We're not looking for people to overshare, but the fact that their teacher, Miss Ritter, likes to bike and watch Netflix are things that they would never know about their teacher.
Right. 90 lessons. What are they all in this socio-emotional area?
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's three. Well, actually, there's more than that. There are 90 lessons for secondary, and then we have 60 lessons for elementary. So there is part of the model, because our piece is we do not allow schools to do the lessons unless they're doing the model together, because it feeds the entire model. So the block team meetings take the information from I times or U times to be able to facilitate that whole student conversation. A number of schools are like, I just would like the lessons. And we'll just, you know, we know they will not get the results. So because our model right now has had impacts at 180 schools, we know that this is a critical part, and this is a critical part to be able to broker that relationship and establish that relationship from staff to student and student to student. But it has to be part of a larger package of training and systems.
Can I ask one more? I hate to hog the whole thing, but I'm so intrigued by this. You mentioned that iTime took place during subject lessons or during the. How does that work? How does it interface with academic work? iTime and U-time.
Yes. So, well, there's two different pieces. We go to the schools and we say that the actual classroom teacher is the one who needs to be the one doing the interventions and know the whole student. And the ability to find out who the whole student is, this is a structured, intentional way of doing that you are systemically learning about all of the students. So we do go to the school to say, you know, in terms of a team of teachers, each teacher would lose 30 minutes of instruction time once a month. So like, I don't give a lesson every week, my team does. The students get one every week, but it's rotated among a team of teachers. So every 3 to 4 weeks, when it's my turn, I'll be doing the lesson and I'll be sharing those kind of what occurred in that lesson with my colleagues. But 30 minutes once a month, you'll be giving up some time.
Right.
Is that the same in primary school? Because they would have the same teacher, wouldn't they?
Yes, Beth, do you want to answer that?
Yes, they would have the same teacher, but we actually train and give supplies to the specialists as well. So the Phy Ed teacher might choose to do a lesson, the music teacher might choose to do a lesson. So it's not confined necessarily where it has to be with their homeroom main teacher. It can be done throughout with the different teachers that the students might have, so that the specialists and those different teachers are also getting an opportunity to build those relationships with those students as well.
Yeah, I think that one of the problems in the UK is that there are very few specialist teachers in primary schools. The class teacher does everything. And in my experience, we've had a number of schemes similar to this, not as holistic as yours, but aimed at personal and social growth. And it's the lesson that goes when the pressure is on. So we say once a week, it should be done, and then it goes to once a fortnight, and then, oh, we didn't have time. The teachers tend to drop it. I can see that by having different teachers rotating it and only half an hour once a month, that makes it much harder to drop, especially if there's that commitment to share with each other. You have that commitment to your colleagues, so you're less likely to say, oh, I didn't have time to do it this week, or we needed to catch up with something that's more important. So yeah, so it's the primary I would be with one class teacher. That would be one.
I think the pieces too, Sue. I appreciate that, those in kind of observations. What we have found is they need to be meaningful and not obligatory. So back to some of the conversations we were having yesterday, we need to be able to, and the schools will soon see the information that they are able to broker from the students, or the relationships the students are having and how much harder they work, that these quote unquote time away becomes time incredibly well spent, because that's in particular often difficult to convince a secondary teacher not to teach a math lesson. After they do they are resoundingly going, these students are working so much harder for me than they ever had before. But that needs to happen by looping that data back, that they can be able to have that experience. I think the other piece is, we talked about, you have unlimited coaching available. You do have 4 on-site visits a year, where you would then get a report back to the school too, to say, your iTime implementation is not meeting what we would expect, and we would like to, we would work with you to kind of improve that, to say, what are the barriers, how can we address that? But you get a report card basically once a quarter to be able to say how your implementation of the overall model is. But iTime is one component, as well as then your coach is going to strategize with the coordinator there to say, what are the barriers? Why are the teachers dropping off? Why are they not seeing meaning? What are the things that we can do to be able to continue to remedy that? That's a great observation.
Another issue, there was some very interesting research done in Wales about 30 years ago, when they were trying to understand why schools which looked to be almost identical in terms of size, mix of students, socioeconomic backgrounds and so on. And what they found was that students who knew more about the personal life of their teachers were the ones, that was a variable that was different between the schools, that had a positive impact on student outcomes. Mm-hmm. So we were trying to share this with teachers, to say, sharing what you've got a dog and what your dog's name is, and you like to go sailing at the weekend. This is actually going to help you improve results. And a lot of teachers felt very strongly that it was wrong to share any part of their personal life with their students. And I just wondered if you had, I saw that they share their plates with the students. I just wondered if you had any of that kind of resistance, or whether this is a cultural thing here.
No, we have the same resistance. I mean, I shouldn't say the same, but we have resistance. I think the piece is, right now we have 20 years of research saying that this will be effective. So it's, and you also really do a lot of coaching on what feels comfortable. We're not asking you to share deep personal secrets, to your point. We're, asking to share, do you have a dog? But the ability, and we have a similar body of research, if the adult is humanized and seen as someone not just, delivering content, but an actual human being, that's how you actually have a relationship formed. So the relationship cannot be one way. You cannot only know things about the student and the student not have any connection to the adult, and then expect that relationship to be formed and all of those outcomes in terms of students working harder, having those other positive aspirations, if that relationship is not a two-way established kind of connection.
Yeah.
Non-authentic.
Yeah, exactly. That's why residential trips make such a difference, because the kids find out personal stuff about their teachers. And that changes the relationship. It's much harder to be misbehaving or not working hard with somebody you know and care about. So
I think some
that's
teachers,
how that works.
it's also hard to share in a non-structured environment. And that's why the iTimes work. So some teachers can form those relationships naturally, right? Like Christina or I would not need an iTime to form a relationship. But there are a number of teachers who do not know how to do it. And so to just say to them, oh, share some personal information. I can tell you teachers that would run scared from that. They'd be like, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean personal information? And so this is a very specific, structured way to do that feels safer to teachers. Like, I'm just writing information on a plate. I just have these specific things. And for those teachers who don't know how to do this, it actually teaches them. The school that I'm coaching this year, they have a teacher that had for years has had parent complaints every year, call after call after call. And last year she started doing iTimes and the parent complaints stopped. And the principal actually went to her and said, because it was just a common thing they had talked about so many times. And he said, you haven't had any complaints this year. Why do you think that is? And she said, because doing these iTimes has taught me how to talk to kids. And for some of us, we need that structure to understand how to have those conversations beyond our content area. And so I think that structure is what comes in handy.
Right, well, I think there's an article there for one of our magazines, definitely. How the teachers need to open up.
It's interesting. When I used to take student-teacher exchanges to Fredonia in New York State, and in the schools they used to teach the different spellings of principal and principal by saying the principal is your friend, your pal. And our students found that was really interesting. And we don't call our head teachers principals, but they couldn't imagine our teachers teaching spelling like that, because the kids would go, as if. That isn't true. Yeah, whilst there was definitely stronger relationships, I felt, focus in America than in the UK. Yeah. So.
Well, on that friendly note, shall I wrap up the meeting and thank the BAR team? Been totally brilliant series, in my view, and lots and lots of food for thought. The recordings, the webinars have been recorded and will be on our site. If the BAR Centre wants to invite people to look at them, we'll provide a code and there'll be no charge. Really, really a brilliant three webinar series. So I'd like to thank you again on behalf of all the delegates, and we hope to receive some articles from you, maybe on very specific elements of the program, and publish them in Teaching Times. So we'll be in contact.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.